Great players don't appear out of nowhere. The trajectory was there. In the spin rate, the prospect report, the contract structure, long before the world noticed. We find that trajectory every morning, pull the 3 stories that are actually moving the game, and break down what they mean before the day gets away. This is Streak Plot Baseball. Let's get into it. The Houston Astros are still trying to be a contender in the AL West, but their playoff odds have slipped to under 20%. And right now, a significant piece of that story has a very familiar name attached to it, Lance McCullers Jr. This is a guy who has been part of some of the most memorable Astros moments of the last decade. Postseason warrior, curveball specialist, the kind of pitcher Houston fans watch grow up in their rotation. But this season, something is genuinely off, and with his contract expiring after this year, the stakes couldn't be higher for everyone involved. McCullers is in the final year of a deal that pays him $17 million per season. That's serious money, even in today's baseball market. And through about 40 innings this season, the results have not been good. His ERA sits just under 7 runs per game, which is a number that raises immediate alarm bells for any starting pitcher on a contending team. Now, here's where this story gets genuinely complicated, and it's worth spending a moment on because it matters for how you understand what's actually happening. There's a statistic called xERA, expected ERA, which basically measures what a pitcher's results should look like based on the quality of contact hitters are making against him, rather than just how many runs actually scored. Think of it as peeling back the surface to see what's underneath. McCullers' xERA is 4.39, which is meaningfully better than his actual 6.86. That gap tells you some of his run prevention has been worse than the underlying performance deserves. So there's a real case that McCullers has been somewhat unlucky this year. His strikeouts are decent, his walks are manageable, and the peripherals aren't the numbers of a pitcher who has completely fallen apart. That's the optimistic read. But here's where you can't just dismiss the concern and move on, because the rest of the picture is not so clean. McCullers has allowed 7 home runs in about 40 innings, and that's a problem that goes well beyond bad luck. His home run rate has been climbing steadily over his career. The career average is already elevated compared to most elite starters, and this season it is pushed to 1.5 home runs per 9 innings. When hitters are getting into pitches against you at that rate, it tends to be a pitch mix issue, a location issue, or sometimes a stuff issue. And when you layer in the fact that his innings totals have been shrinking and he's on pace for significantly fewer innings this year than his career average, you start to wonder about the physical side of things. This is an 11-year big leaguer who has spent real time on the injured list throughout his career, and the workload data this season suggests he isn't quite at full throttle. That matters enormously for what happens this offseason, because McCullers is going to be a free agent, and the contract conversation is going to be shaped almost entirely by what the next 4 months look like. If the ERA normalizes, if that gap between what's happened and what should have happened closes in his favor, he has a case for a meaningful deal. If the home run rate stays elevated and the innings totals stay low, the market is going to be much colder than he'd like. Houston has only about $3.5 million in luxury tax flexibility, which means even if they want to bring him back, the math is tight. There may not be room to write the kind of check that would keep him in an Astros uniform. For the fans in Houston, the question is really pretty simple and also kind of heartbreaking. Is this the same Lance McCullers you've been watching all these years, or has the body finally started making decisions that the arm can't override? The analytics say the underlying stuff isn't quite as bad as the surface results. The home run trends and the workload patterns say the concerns are real and they're not new. The next few months are going to answer that question, and the answer will determine whether McCullers finishes his career in Houston or somewhere else entirely. The St. Louis Cardinals have over $129 million of luxury tax runway. They're trying to figure out who's part of their next competitive window, and right now one of the most interesting and quietly dangerous stories on their roster involves a starting pitcher named Michael McGreevy. If you haven't been paying close attention, McGreevy looks like a revelation. He's one of the best stories on the team right now. But if you look underneath the hood, there are some flashing yellow lights that every Cardinals fan needs to understand before they get too attached to this version of him. Here's the surface story. Through 10 starts and 56 innings, McGreevy is sitting on a 2.40 ERA. That's a legitimately excellent number, top of the rotation territory. The kind of number that gets you excited about the future of a young pitcher on a team that spent the last couple of years trying to find its footing. He's walked barely anyone, he's kept the hits manageable, and he's been one of the more reliable arms in a Cardinals rotation that has needed reliable arms badly. Now, here's the underneath story, and this is where it gets really important. There's a way to measure what a pitcher's ERA should look like, based purely on the quality of contact hitters are generating, how hard they're hitting the ball, how often they're squaring it up perfectly. It's called expected ERA, or xERA, and McGreevy's xERA this season is 5.85. That is a 3.5 run gap between what the scoreboard says and what the contact quality says. In plain English, hitters are hitting the ball hard against McGreevy, and it just hasn't fallen in yet. To give you a sense of why that gap matters, 41% of the balls in play against him have been what analysts classify as hard contact. The barrel rate, which measures how often hitters are making the absolute best possible contact, is elevated. The exit speeds off his pitches are in a range that historically produces a lot of runs. The fact that those runs haven't materialized is partly luck, partly excellent Cardinals defense, and partly timing. But history is pretty clear on what happens when the luck normalizes. The ERA comes up to meet the underlying reality. Now, to be fair to McGreevy, and this is an important nuance, he does have a history of outperforming his expected numbers. Even across his career, his actual ERA tends to run below what the contact quality would predict. So some gap is normal for him. This gap is just historically large, nearly 2.5 runs beyond even his own established baseline. There's one more thing worth mentioning, and it's not something you'd notice watching a game. McGreevy's fastball velocity is down about 1.5 miles from last season. He's sitting 91 miles per hour now, and when a pitcher's velocity dips like that, it usually means the pitch that he was using to set up everything else becomes a little easier to square up. The hard contact numbers this season are consistent with that story. So what does all of this mean for Cardinals fans who have genuinely enjoyed watching McGreevy pitch this year? It means enjoy what you're seeing, but temper the expectations a little. The regression clock is ticking, and statistically speaking, the second half of the season tends to be when these kinds of gaps start closing. The Cardinals have the financial flexibility to handle it if they need to make a rotation adjustment. Replacing a league minimum pitcher on a team with that much luxury tax room is not a difficult lift. But the ride between now and August may be a little bumpier than the first 2 months suggested. Here's the one thing to take away from this. Michael McGreevy's 2.40 ERA is real, but it's also borrowed. The underlying contact quality says the number won't stay there, and the second half of his season is going to tell us whether he can make enough adjustments to keep this run going, or whether the baseballs finally start finding the gaps. The Arizona Diamondbacks are a team right in the thick of the NL West race, sitting at nearly 50-50 playoff odds. And today, they got hit with the kind of news that can quietly derail a contender's season before summer even gets going. Corbin Burnes is heading to the 60-day injured list with Tommy John surgery. And if you know anything about what Tommy John means for a pitcher, you already know the real story here isn't about the next few weeks. It's about the next year and a half. Let's just sit with that for a second. Tommy John surgery is a full reconstruction of the elbow ligament, and the recovery timeline for a starting pitcher is typically 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer. Burnes isn't just missing a handful of starts. He is almost certainly done for this season, and there are real questions about whether he'll be fully himself when he comes back. Arizona knew he had durability concerns coming in. This is a guy who has posted below-average innings totals in 4 of his 8 big league seasons. That's not a knock on the man, that's just the documented history. The Diamondbacks made a bet that he'd stay healthy, and that bet did not pay off. So where does that leave this team? The rotation has a real hole in it now, and the honest answer is that no single pitcher is going to fill it cleanly. What actually happens when a frontline starter goes down isn't a one-for-one replacement. It's more like a chain reaction. The bullpen picks up more innings. A swingman who is eating up long relief appearances suddenly gets stretched into the rotation. Games that were supposed to go 7 deep go 5. That's the reality of life without your ace, and Arizona's bullpen is going to feel that weight over the coming weeks. But here's the piece of this story that actually matters for the next month and beyond. And honestly, it's the most interesting part of this whole situation. The Diamondbacks have a pitching prospect in the minor leagues named Daniel Egan, and Corbin Burns just fast-forwarded his career timeline. Egan is currently pitching at Double-A. He's rated the 8th best prospect in the Arizona organization, and scouts have him with a 2027 Big League ETA under normal circumstances. That means, in a world without this injury, he probably spends the rest of this season refining his craft at the upper minors, adds some polish in Triple-A next year, and arrives in Arizona sometime in 2027 as a finished product. That was the plan. The plan just changed. His fastball sits 93 to 95 miles per hour, and scouts describe it as a true downhill plane, the kind of pitch that gets natural movement and makes hitters uncomfortable even when they know it's coming. His command isn't where it needs to be yet, which is the honest caveat here. He's a work in progress, not a finished ace, but a rotation hole on a contending team has a way of accelerating those timelines, and the Diamondbacks are going to have to decide sooner than expected whether Egan is ready to be part of their big league picture. What does this mean practically? Arizona has 7 games coming up over the next week, and they will get through them with a patchwork approach. Stretched relievers, an opener here, a bulk guy there. But as the calendar flips into June and July, the organization's scouts and front office are going to be watching Egan very closely. If he keeps throwing strikes at Double-A, a Triple-A promotion is coming fast. And from Triple-A, it's a short drive to the majors when your team needs an arm. Here's your one-sentence takeaway for the next conversation you have with a Diamondbacks fan. Corbin Burns is out for the season with Tommy John, the rotation math doesn't work without him, and a prospect named Daniel Egan just became one of the most important names in the Arizona organization, even if most fans have never heard of him yet. That's the read on the day. The game moves fast. The data moves faster. Come back tomorrow and we'll be ahead of it again. This is Streak Plot Baseball, where greatness is never random.